The early morning light cast long shadows across Jefferson Square Park as Frank Miller lowered himself onto his usual bench. That's when he saw them, a German shepherd, standing perfectly erect on his hind legs, front paws held rigid in what was unmistakably a military salute. Beside the dog, a small boy in a wheelchair mirrored the same salute, his right arm crisp despite the empty space where his left leg should have been. The old Vietnam veteran felt something catch in his throat. Passers-by tossed coins into an upturned army cap, most hurrying past without truly seeing what Frank saw: the precision in the dog's posture, the pride in the boy's eyes despite his frail frame. Some spectators snapped photos, others whispered comments that made Frank's weathered hands clench. What Frank didn't know yet was that Shadow and Ethan's salute carried a promise made in blood on a battlefield 6,000 miles away. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Fort Liberty. North Carolina had always been a town where civilian life and military duty blended together like the stars and stripes. Once known as Fort Bragg, the renamed military installation remained the heart of the community, pumping soldiers and veterans through the town's veins like lifeblood. The small downtown area, with its brick-front shops and flag-adorned lamp-posts, was currently dressed in its autumn finest crimson and gold leaves drifting from trees that had witnessed generations of soldiers come and go. The post-pandemic economy had hit the community hard. Storefronts that once housed family businesses now displayed for lease signs, and the local VA office had lines that stretched around the block on benefit days. Yet there remained an unmistakable pride here, visible in the meticulously maintained Veterans Memorial and the way locals still stood when the national anthem played before high school football games. Matt Sullivan hadn't planned on making Fort Liberty his home. At 35, the former Army K-9 handler had expected to complete his 20 years before even thinking about civilian life. His muscular frame still carried the military posture, though his eyes held the distant look common to those who'd seen too much. The 3-bedroom ranch house he now shared with Sarah and Ethan Carter sat on the outskirts of town, modest, but with a yard where Shadow could run. Shadow, the 7-year-old German shepherd, had transitioned from military working dog to family companion, though he still conducted his own perimeter checks each morning out of habit. His dark coat had started showing flecks of gray around the muzzle, but his alert amber eyes missed nothing. The dog's specialty had once been explosive detection, with a nose so reliable that commanders requested him for their most critical missions. 8-year-old Ethan Carter had his father's determined jaw and his mother's expressive eyes. The wheelchair he navigated with growing confidence contained a boy whose energy seemed too big for his diminished physical form. The missing left leg never dimmed his smile, though nightmares of the explosion still woke him screaming some nights. Sarah Carter, at 33, wore her grief like an invisible backpack always present, occasionally lighter, but never gone. Her blonde hair was often pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hands perpetually busy with extra shifts at the hospital cafeteria or mending Ethan's constantly torn shirts. The Gold Star family benefits barely covered their mortgage, let alone the mounting medical bills. And somewhere in Arlington National Cemetery, beneath a white marble headstone, lay Staff Sergeant Jason Carter, the thread that had bound them all together, even in his absence. The Afghan sun beat down mercilessly as Matt Sullivan and Jason Carter crouched behind a crumbling wall, Shadow panting softly between them. Their squad had been tasked with clearing compounds in a small village outside Kandahar routine, except for the intelligence suggesting high-value targets might be present. After this tour, I'm thinking about requesting a transfer to training, Jason said, adjusting his helmet. Be home more for Ethan. Kids growing up on video calls. Matt nodded, checking Shadow's tactical vest. You'd be good at it. Shadow here still remembers when you were handling him before they paired him with me. As if recognizing his name, the German shepherd's ears perked up, his intelligent eyes moving between the two men he trusted most. That dog's smarter than half our platoon. Jason laughed, the sound incongruous in the tense silence of the mission. Neither man knew then that this conversation would be one of their last. The memory dissolved as Matt jolted awake on the couch, his hand automatically reaching for the dog who lay vigilant beside him. 3 years had passed since that day, but the images remained razor-sharp. The sudden explosion, the chaos of gunfire, Shadow frantically trying to drag an unconscious Jason to safety, and the final moments in the medevac helicopter. Take care of them both, Jason had whispered through blood-flecked lips, his grip on Matt's wrist weakening. Promise me, Shadow. And my boy. A promise made as rotors whirred and medics shouted a promise that became the cornerstone of Matt's civilian life after his honorable discharge 6 months later. Matt's first day at the Carter household had been awkward at best. Sarah had answered the door with red-rimmed eyes and a polite distance that spoke volumes. 8-year-old Ethan, already adapted to his wheelchair by then, had lit up at the sight of Shadow. "Dad's dog," he'd exclaimed, wheeling himself forward as Shadow gently approached, sniffing the boy with recognition. The dog had met Ethan twice before, during the boy's visit to base with his father, the same visit when the unthinkable happened. "He's your dog now," Matt had said, kneeling to the boy's level. "Your dad wanted you to have him." Sarah had watched from the doorway, arms crossed. "We barely have room," she'd said. "I can find an apartment nearby?" Matt had offered, just close enough to help with Shadow and anything else you might need. But Ethan had been insistent, and Sarah too exhausted to argue. The guest room became Matt's, and slowly a fragile routine emerged from the rubble of their shattered lives. It was a Tuesday morning when Matt discovered the reality of the Carters' financial situation. Sarah had left for her early shift at the hospital cafeteria, and Matt was searching for Shadow's vaccination records when he found the stack of bills in the kitchen drawer, medical expenses, mortgage notices with threatening red stamps, and a letter about Ethan's physical therapy being discontinued due to insurance limitations. Later that day, Dr. Alexis Donovan explained the situation during Ethan's checkup. "There's a new procedure," she said, her voice low as Ethan played with Shadow in the corner of the examination room. "A specialized prosthetic surgery that could help him walk again. His case is ideal for it." Hope flared in Matt's chest. The VA would cover that. "Right, Dr. Donovan's expression said everything. "It's still considered experimental. Insurance will cover about 20%. The rest." "How much?" Matt asked. "All in about 75,000. The number hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. "He's a tough kid," Dr. Donovan continued, watching Ethan laugh as Shadow performed a trick. "But he's growing. The longer we wait, the more his body adapts to the imbalance, and the harder rehabilitation becomes. That evening, after Ethan was asleep, Matt found Sarah at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, shoulders slumped in defeat. "I found the bills," he said simply, sitting across from her. Sarah didn't look up. "We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank called again today. And Ethan's surgery, a fantasy," she said bitterly. "Unless you've got a trust fund you haven't mentioned." Matt ran a hand through his short hair. "Jason would have found a way." The words hung between them the first time Matt had directly challenged her since moving in. Sarah's eyes flashed. "Jason isn't here. That's the whole problem, isn't it?" "I made him a promise," Matt said quietly. "I intend to keep it." The idea came the next morning. Matt had taken Shadow to the backyard for training exercises, the daily routine that kept the dog's skills sharp and his mind engaged. Ethan watched from the patio, eyes wide as Shadow responded to hand signals, verbal commands, and finally stood at perfect attention on his hind legs in a salute that had once been part of demonstration routines. "Can you teach me to do that?" Ethan asked. Matt smiled. "The salute. Sure, it's easy." He demonstrated the proper form. Back straight, chin up, hand at the right angle. Ethan mimicked the motion perfectly, his small face serious. "You know, your dad and Shadow used to do demonstrations for visitors on base," Matt said. "People would always stop to watch. Sometimes they'd even donate to the K9 Veterans Fund." He paused, watching as Shadow maintained his position, disciplined and dignified despite balancing on 2 legs. "People donated money?" Ethan asked. Something clicked in Matt's mind. He looked at Shadow, then at Ethan, then at the medical bills visible through the kitchen window. "They did," Matt said slowly. "They absolutely did." That night, after Ethan was asleep, Matt researched street performance permits and regulations. He found his old dress uniform in the back of the closet and ran his fingers over the ribbons and insignia, remembering. Shadow watched from the doorway, head tilted in curiosity. "What do you think, boy?" Matt whispered. "One more mission." The dog's tail wagged once, decisive. Matt looked at the laptop screen displaying Dr. Donovan's email about surgical scheduling and payment deadlines. They had 4 months to come up with the money before Ethan's window of optimal recovery would begin to close. 4 months to perform a different kind of military miracle. Jefferson Square Park bustled with the usual morning crowd, government employees hurrying to offices, tourists consulting maps, and locals walking dogs or jogging along tree-lined paths. Matt had chosen this spot carefully high-foot traffic, proximity to both military offices and civilian businesses, and a small amphitheater area where street performers sometimes gathered. "Are you sure about this?" Matt asked Ethan, who sat in his wheelchair wearing a crisp blue button-down shirt that had once belonged to his father, carefully altered by Sarah to fit his smaller frame. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied with a military precision that made Matt's heart twist. The boy had been practicing his salute all week, perfecting the angle of his arm, the position of his fingers. Shadow stood alertly beside them, his coat brushed to a shine, wearing his old service vest that Matt had carefully cleaned. The vest bore no official military insignia. Matt was careful about that, but its professional appearance lent credibility to their presence. "Remember, Shadow only performs when I give the command," Matt reminded Ethan. "And if you get tired—" I know. Ethan interrupted with an 8-year-old's impatience. "We take a break. But I won't get tired." Matt smiled at the determination in the boy's voice. It was pure Jason, that stubborn refusal to acknowledge limitations. He set down a small wooden box in front of them with a hand-painted sign, "Ethan's Walk Fund. Help a Gold Star child take his first steps again." Beneath was a smaller line of text explaining that Ethan was the son of Staff Sergeant Jason Carter, who had given his life in service to his country. No mention of Matt, no details about Shadow's military connection, just the essentials. "Ready?" Matt asked. Ethan nodded, straightening his shoulders. Matt took a deep breath and gave the command, "Shadow, attention." The German Shepherd immediately rose to his hind legs, front paws held rigidly in the perfect salute posture he'd been trained to perform. Simultaneously, Ethan raised his right hand in a crisp salute, his small face solemn with concentration. For several minutes, nothing happened. People walked by, some slowing to look, others barely glancing their way. Matt began to doubt himself. This had been a foolish idea, born of desperation. He was about to call it off when an elderly man in a Vietnam veteran's cap approached, leaning heavily on a cane. "That's some dog you've got there, son," the man said, his weathered face creasing into a smile as he studied Shadow's perfect form. "German Shepherd, military trained." "Yes, sir," Matt replied. "Former explosive detection K9. The man's eyes shifted to Ethan, taking in the empty space where his left leg should have been, then to the sign, and to... Something in his expression changed. "Staff Sergeant Carter," he read aloud. "Afghanistan." Matt nodded. The old veteran straightened as much as his aged spine would allow and returned Ethan's salute with formal precision. "Frank Miller, Sergeant First Class, retired, Vietnam. 2 tours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, dropping it into the wooden box. "Not much, but it's what I can do today. I'll be back tomorrow." As Frank walked away, others began to notice. A businessman dropped in $5. A young mother explained to her curious child why the boy and dog were saluting, then contributed some change. By noon, a small crowd had gathered to watch Shadow maintain his disciplined stance, breaking only when Matt commanded rest periods. Ethan's enthusiasm never wavered. Even as the sun climbed higher, he told snippets of his father's story to anyone who asked, his eyes bright with pride. "My dad was a hero," he told a group of tourists. And Shadow was his dog first, before Sergeant Matt got him. A local news reporter, attracted by the unusual sight, approached in the early afternoon. Her cameraman captured footage of Shadow and Ethan performing their synchronized salute while she interviewed Matt at a respectful distance. "We're not looking for charity," Matt explained carefully. "Ethan has a chance at a specialized surgery, but insurance won't cover most of it. We're just trying to help him walk again." By the end of their first day, the wooden box contained just over $200, far from their goal. But a start. More importantly, the reporter promised a short segment on the evening news. "You did great today, buddy," Matt told Ethan as they packed up. "Your dad would be proud." Ethan beamed, though exhaustion showed in the droop of his shoulders. "Do you think people will remember us tomorrow?" Matt ruffled the boy's hair. "I think a few might." He had no way of knowing that the local news segment would be picked up by military social media accounts overnight. or that by morning their story would have spread to veterans groups across 3 states. When they arrived home, Sarah's car was already in the driveway earlier than expected. Matt felt a knot form in his stomach. He'd meant to be back before her, to ease into explaining what they'd done. She was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, laptop open to the local news website where their story was already posted. "What the hell were you thinking?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. "Taking him out to beg for money, using Jason's name." Matt had prepared for this reaction, but the reality of Sarah's anger still stung. "It's not begging," he replied calmly. "It's performing. Shadow was trained for demonstration work, and we're being honest about what the money is for." "You had no right," Sarah hissed, mindful of Ethan wheeling himself into the kitchen behind Matt. "No right to make these decisions without me, to put him on display like some—" "Mom, it was my idea too," Ethan interrupted. "I wanted to help." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at her son, but hardened again when she turned back to Matt. "He's 8 years old. You're the adult. You should know better." "We made over $200 today," Matt said quietly. "At that rate, with weekends, we might make enough for the first deposit in a month." "That's not the point." Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "You're exploiting his disability, exploiting Jason's death." "Dad would have done the same," Ethan said suddenly, his young voice steady. "He always said we have to fight for what matters." The kitchen fell silent, the ghost of Jason Carter suddenly present among them. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, visibly struggling for composure. "Go wash up for dinner, Ethan," she said finally. "I need to talk to Matt alone." When Ethan had reluctantly wheeled himself out of the kitchen, Sarah turned back to Matt, her anger now mixed with something else, fear, perhaps. "Do you have any idea what people might think?" she asked. "What they might say about him, about us, using his father's service, his injury, to collect money on the street?" "People responded with respect," Matt countered. "Veterans especially. And every cent goes directly to his surgery fund." "And what happens when it's not enough?" Sarah challenged. "When you've put him through this public spectacle and we still can't afford the surgery?" The question hit its mark. Matt had asked himself the same thing, lying awake last night. "Then at least we tried," he said finally. "And isn't that what we owe Jason? To try everything possible?" The mention of her late husband's name still had the power to disarm Sarah. She sank into a kitchen chair, suddenly looking exhausted. "I can't fight both of you," she said quietly. "But this is temporary. If it doesn't work, or if it becomes too much for Ethan, we stop. Immediately." Matt nodded, accepting the compromise. "Agreed." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes suspiciously bright. "He saluted like Jason, didn't he?" "Perfect form," Matt confirmed. "Like he's been doing it his whole life." A ghost of a smile touched Sarah's lips. "His father used to practice with him using toy soldiers." She stood up, effectively ending the conversation. 2 weeks. We'll see where we are in 2 weeks." As she walked past him toward Ethan's room, Matt caught the faint scent of hospital antiseptic and cafeteria food reminders of the double shift she'd worked to make ends meet while he'd been in the park with her son. The weight of his promise to Jason had never felt heavier. $200 down, only $74,800 to go. and a deadline that loomed like an approaching storm. "We'll make it work," he whispered to Shadow, who had settled vigilantly by the door. "Somehow." By the second week, Matt and Ethan had established a routine. They arrived at Jefferson Square Park each morning by 9, setting up near the central fountain where the foot traffic was heaviest. Ethan had grown confident greeting strangers, answering questions about his father with pride shining in his eyes. Shadow's discipline never wavered. The German shepherd could hold his salute posture for impressive stretches before Matt would command a break. Frank Miller, true to his word, returned daily. The Vietnam veteran often brought coffee for Matt and hot chocolate for Ethan, staying to share stories of his own service with the boy. "My daddy was a hero," Ethan told Frank one crisp morning as Shadow rested between performances. "He saved his whole unit when they found those bombs." Matt felt his chest tighten. The boy's understanding of his father's final mission was a simplified version of a complex and tragic reality. "He sure was a hero," Frank agreed, his rheumy eyes kind. "Just like you're being brave now." As Frank shuffled away, Ethan looked up at Matt. "Can you tell me more about the day Dad died? Mom never wants to talk about it." Matt knelt beside the wheelchair, choosing his words carefully. "Your dad was protecting everyone, including you. Remember that day you came to visit the base?" Ethan nodded, his expression darkening. "I remember the loud noise, and waking up with my leg hurting really bad." The memory rushed back with brutal clarity, Jason's face lighting up as the transport bringing his wife and son arrived on base, the impromptu tour of the facilities, the unexpected order for their unit to check a newly reported suspicious site nearby. Jason had begged their commanding officer, Major Wilson, to let his family come along just to the perimeter, a supposedly secure area, to see where he worked. A routine demonstration of Shadow's detection abilities for Ethan's benefit. Except nothing had been routine that day. "Your dad wanted you to see what he did," Matt continued gently. "He was so proud to show you how Shadow worked. And then the bad guys made the bomb go off," Ethan said with the direct simplicity of a child. Matt nodded, not correcting the boy's understanding. How could he explain that intelligence had been wrong, that the building was rigged with a sophisticated explosive device that even Shadow hadn't detected, the type of IED that had been designed specifically to evade detection dogs, with chemical masking agents that confused their sensitive noses? "That's right," he said instead. "But your dad made sure you and your mom got help first. That's what heroes do." Ethan considered this, then straightened in his wheelchair. "Is it time for Shadow to salute again?" Matt checked his watch. "Let's give him 5 more minutes to rest." He scanned the growing crowd of onlookers. Their donation box was filling steadily, the local news story had helped, as had several viral social media posts from veterans groups, but they were still far from their goal. And Matt couldn't help noticing that some people watched with disapproval rather than support. "Exploiting that poor kid," he'd overheard a woman mutter yesterday. "Using a disabled child for money, shameful." The comment had stung, echoing Sarah's initial objections, but Matt pushed the doubt away. They weren't begging, they were working for every dollar, performing a service that honored Jason's memory while helping his son. At the 3-week mark, Sarah's reluctant 2-week trial period had come and gone without further discussion. Their routine had expanded to include Saturdays, and the living room table had become headquarters for counting the day's donations and updating their tracking spreadsheet. $2,875, Ethan announced proudly one evening, carefully placing bills into piles as Shadow watched attentively from his position beside the wheelchair. Sarah, returning from her evening shift, paused in the doorway. Something had shifted in her stance over the past weeks, a slight softening toward Matt, a reluctant acknowledgement that their efforts were making progress. "That's wonderful," she said, setting down her purse. "Almost 3,000? If we keep going at this rate, we'll have enough for the deposit by the end of next month," Matt said, trying to keep the excitement in his voice measured. "Dr. Donovan said that would still give them time to schedule the surgery before the optimal window closes." Sarah nodded, but her expression remained guarded. "Ethan, it's time for your physical therapy exercises. Then bed." As she helped her son from his wheelchair to the floor mat for his exercises, Matt noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands. She was working double shifts at the hospital cafeteria 3 days a week now, exhausting herself to contribute to their goal. "I can handle his PT tonight," Matt offered. "You should rest." To his surprise, Sarah nodded gratefully. "His left arm needs extra work today. The therapist said he's compensating too much with his right side." It was the most detailed instruction she'd ever entrusted to Matt, regarding Ethan's care, a small victory of trust. Later, after Ethan was asleep, Matt found Sarah at the kitchen table, sorting through mail. An opened letter from the bank lay before her. "They've approved a 3-month forbearance on the mortgage," she said without looking up. "That buys us some breathing room." Matt sat across from her. "That's good news. It just postpones the inevitable if we can't keep up with payments after that," Sarah replied, her practical nature asserting itself. "But it helps for now." She finally met his eyes. "I saw the comments on that Facebook post about Ethan and Shadow." Matt tensed. The viral post had attracted thousands of supportive messages, but also a vocal minority criticizing their methods. "People who matter understand what we're doing," he said firmly. "Do they?" Sarah challenged, though without her earlier heat. "Sometimes I'm not sure I understand it myself. Is this really about Ethan's surgery? Or is it about your promise to Jason?" The question caught Matt off guard. "Both," he admitted after a moment. "I owe him this. But it's more than that now." "What happens after?" Sarah asked, voicing the question that had lurked unspoken between them. "After the surgery, whether it works or not. What then?" Matt had asked himself the same question countless times. His life had been defined by his promise to Jason for so long that he rarely thought beyond it. "I don't know," he said honestly. "That depends on a lot of things. On you." He didn't add, "On whether there's a place for me hereafter." Something shifted in Sarah's expression, a recognition of the uncertainty they shared. "One day at a time," she said finally, echoing the mantra of the grief support group she'd briefly attended after Jason's death. Matt nodded. One day at a time. As October progressed, the fall air grew sharper, and their daily performances began attracting consistent crowds. Local businesses started contributing. The coffee shop near the park offered free drinks, a nearby diner provided lunch, and the owner of a sporting goods store donated a better quality wheelchair with specialized cushioning for Ethan's long days outdoors. Frank Miller had become their unofficial promoter, telling Ethan and Shadow's story to anyone who would listen. His network of veterans expanded their reach, bringing supporters from neighboring towns, but with increased visibility came increased scrutiny. One rainy Tuesday, as Matt was helping Ethan into a rain jacket between performances, a Parks Department official approached with a clipboard. "You have a performer's permit?" the woman asked, her tone professional but not unkind. Matt produced the permit he'd obtained their first week. "All in order. We're careful about not blocking pathways." The official checked the documentation and nodded. "Had some complaints about exploitation of a minor. Need to follow up on those." Matt felt his jaw tighten. "We're raising money for his medical procedure. His mother is fully aware and supportive. And the dog, any issues with aggression. Shadow is a former military working dog with extensive public demonstration experience." Matt replied, "He's never shown aggression towards civilians." The official made notes, then looked at Ethan. "You doing okay, young man? Not too tired out here every day?" Ethan sat up straighter in his wheelchair. "I'm helping earn money for my new leg," he said proudly. "Just like my dad would have done." Something in the official's expression softened. She closed her notebook. "Carry on, then. Just be aware that if the crowds get any larger, you might need additional permits." As she walked away, Matt released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The incident reminded him of their vulnerability. One complaint from the wrong person could shut them down. That evening, Dr. Donovan called with an update that sent a chill through Matt's spine. "We need to move up our timeline," she said without preamble. "I've been reviewing Ethan's latest scans. The curvature in his spine is progressing faster than anticipated compensation for the missing limb. If we wait the full 4 months, we risk complications that could make the surgery more difficult." Matt gripped the phone tighter. "How much time do we have?" "Ideally, 6 weeks instead of 16. Her voice was calm but firm. "The first deposit would need to be made in 4 weeks to secure the surgical team and facility. 4 weeks. Matt looked at their tracking spreadsheet. They'd raised just over $11,000, impressive progress, but not nearly enough to meet the accelerated schedule. "I'll talk to Sarah," he said, his mind already racing through possibilities. More hours in the park. Additional locations. A crowdfunding campaign. After hanging up, he sat heavily on the edge of his bed, Shadow resting his head on Matt's knee in silent support. "We need to step things up, boy," Matt said quietly, scratching behind the dog's ears. "Got any ideas?" Shadow's intelligent eyes seemed to hold wisdom beyond words. The German shepherd had been unusually attentive to Ethan lately, sometimes whining softly when the boy struggled with pain after long days in the wheelchair. Sometimes Matt wondered if the dog remembered that day on the base, if Shadow blamed himself for not detecting the explosive that had taken Jason's life and Ethan's leg. Dogs lived in the present more than humans did, but Shadow's bond with both father and son seemed to transcend ordinary canine memory. Matt waited until Ethan was asleep before sharing Dr. Donovan's news with Sarah. They sat at the kitchen table, the house quiet except for the occasional creak of settling foundations. 6 weeks, Sarah repeated, her voice hollow. "That's impossible. We won't have enough." "We need to try new approaches," Matt insisted. "I've been thinking about reaching out to Jason's old unit, seeing if they might organize something." Sarah was already shaking her head. "Most of them sent money for the funeral, helped with initial expenses. We can't ask again." "What about a formal fundraiser? Frank knows people at the VFW hall." "Planning an event takes time we don't have," Sarah countered, ever practical. And expenses we can't afford. They sat in frustrated silence, the clock on the microwave marking passing minutes. Finally, Sarah spoke again, her voice softer. I found something yesterday. While looking for Ethan's baby book, she rose and left the room, returning moments later with a leather-bound journal. Jason kept this. I never could bring myself to read it until now. She placed it on the table between them. There's a letter inside. To you. Matt stared at the journal, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wrote to me. Sarah nodded. To both of us. Actually, separate letters. He wrote them after Ethan was born. Said it was what responsible soldiers with families should do. Her voice caught. In case of the worst, with unsteady hands. Matt opened the journal to where a folded paper had been placed. His name was written on the outside in Jason's distinctive block lettering. The letter was dated 6 years earlier, when Ethan was just 2 years old. Matt, if you're reading this, I didn't make it back. First, don't blame yourself. Whatever happened. I know you did everything possible. That's who you are. Second, I need to ask something that's probably unfair. Watch over my family. Not forever, Sarah will find her way. She's stronger than anyone I know. But until then, be the backup they need. Especially Shadow. You know how special he is. When they paired him with you after my transfer to Field Ops, it felt right. Like keeping him in the family. If anything happens, he should go back to Ethan and Sarah. Show my boy what his old man stood for. You're my brother in everything but blood. I trust you with the things I love most, until Valhalla. Jason. Matt carefully refolded the letter, his vision blurred. He planned for this, he said finally. All of it. That's who he was. Sarah agreed quietly. Always 3 steps ahead. Did you know Shadow was originally Jason's dog? Matt asked. Sarah nodded. He talked about Shadow all the time during his first deployment. Said that dog saved his sanity. She paused. There's something else you should know. Jason was showing early signs of PTSD after his first tour. That's why they reassigned Shadow to you for the second deployment he requested it. Said his focus wasn't good enough anymore for canine handling. The revelation struck Matt like a physical blow. He'd always assumed the transfer was routine personnel management, never that his friend had been struggling. He never told me, Matt said. He never told anyone except his commanding officer. Sarah replied, and me, in one late-night video call when Ethan was already asleep. This new understanding of Jason, his foresight. His private battles gave Matt a fresh perspective on their current mission. Jason had faced his own invisible wounds with quiet dignity, preparing contingencies for those he loved. We're going to make this work, Matt said with renewed determination. For Ethan, for Jason, we'll find a way to raise the money. Sarah studied him for a long moment. I believe you, she said finally. For the first time since you showed up on our doorstep with Shadow and Jason's tags, I actually believe you. The admission hung in the air between them, not quite forgiveness, not quite acceptance, but a tentative bridge across the gulf of grief that had separated them. Outside, an autumn wind rattled the windows, sending dried leaves skittering across the driveway. In Ethan's room, Shadow lay vigilant beside the boy's bed, a living link to the father he'd lost. And somewhere in the small hours of morning, an idea began to form in Matt's mind, a way to honor his promise that might just close the gap between what they had and what they needed. But first, he needed to make a difficult phone call to someone from their past, someone who might not welcome hearing from him at all. The Veterans Day Parade had been a Fort Liberty tradition for decades, drawing thousands of spectators to line the main street through downtown. For Matt, the approaching holiday represented both opportunity and deadline. Dr. Donovan needed the surgical deposit just 3 days after Veterans Day. "We're at 22,000, he told Frank during their now regular morning coffee at the park. "Not even halfway there." The old veteran frowned, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "Parade committee's looking for special performances this year. Might be worth applying." Matt shook his head. "Already tried. They're booked solid with school bands and drill teams." He didn't mention the real reason for the rejection, a committee member's concern about exploiting a child's disability for fundraising. Frank's weathered face creased with determination. "Let me make some calls. Got some pull with the VFW crowd still." Matt was about to reply when Shadow suddenly tensed beside him, the dog's posture shifting subtly into alert mode. Following the German shepherd's gaze, Matt felt his stomach drop. Major Robert Wilson was walking purposefully toward them across the park, his civilian clothes doing nothing to diminish his military bearing. His close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and rigid posture were instantly recognizable, even 3 years after Matt had last seen him issuing orders in Afghanistan. "Sullivan," the major said by way of greeting, his voice carrying the same clipped authority it had in the field. Matt found himself automatically straightening. "Major Wilson. Didn't know you were stationed at Fort Liberty now, sir. Joint Special Operations Liaison. Been here 6 months. Wilson's eyes moved to Shadow, who remained alert but calm. "I see the K9 is still with you." "Shadow lives with us now," Ethan piped up from his wheelchair. "He was my dad's dog first." Wilson's expression flickered as he took in the boy, recognition dawning. "Carter's son," he said quietly. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, mimicking the formal address he'd heard Matt use. An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Major Wilson had been the commanding officer who authorized Jason's family's visit to the forward operating base, who approved the demonstration mission that went catastrophically wrong, the man who wrote the condolence letter that Sarah kept in her bedside drawer. "I've been seeing you two around the park," Wilson said finally. "Heard about your performances." The slight hesitation before performances carried volumes of disapproval. "We're raising money for Ethan's surgery," Matt explained, fighting to keep defensiveness from his tone. Wilson's jaw tightened. "By using military salutes for profit. Having a child and service dog perform like circus acts." Frank Miller, who had been quietly observing, cleared his throat. "With respect, Major, I don't see anything disrespectful about what they're doing. Quite the opposite." Wilson turned his steely gaze to Frank. "And you are Sergeant First Class Frank Miller, retired, 173rd Airborne, Vietnam." The Major gave a curt nod of acknowledgement before turning back to Matt. "There are proper channels for medical funding, VA benefits, military family foundations." "All denied or insufficient," Matt interrupted, an action that would have been unthinkable during his active duty. "We've tried every official avenue." "Perhaps there's a reason for that," Wilson suggested, his voice lowering. Not every procedure is medically necessary or advisable. The implication that Ethan's surgery might be unnecessary sent a flash of anger through Matt. Dr. Donovan at Walter Reed disagrees. She believes this is Ethan's best chance to walk again. Wilson's expression remained unmoved. I understand your attachment to Carter's family, Sullivan. But exploiting military symbols, using the boy's disability— I'm not being exploited, Ethan interjected with unexpected firmness. I'm honoring my dad. The major looked taken aback by the child's direct challenge. Before he could respond, Matt stepped between them. We have all the proper permits, sir, he said, deliberately using the military address. And we're not misrepresenting anything. Just a veteran and his service dog helping a Gold Star family. Wilson studied him for a long moment. The optics matter. Sullivan. This reflects on all of us who serve. He glanced at Ethan again, something unreadable crossing his features. I'll be watching your activities closely. As the major walked away, Frank let out a low whistle. That man's carrying a heavy load of something. Guilt, Matt said quietly, ensuring Ethan couldn't hear. He approved the mission where Jason died. Frank nodded slowly. Figured it was something like that. Man, don't get that twisted up over a kid and dog saluting unless there's more to the story. Matt knelt beside Ethan, who looked troubled. Don't worry about what he said. We're doing the right thing. He didn't like Dad. Did he? Ethan asked with a child's perceptiveness. Matt chose his words carefully. It's complicated, buddy. Your dad was very brave. Sometimes braver than the rule book allowed. That can be hard for commanders to handle. The explanation seemed to satisfy Ethan, but Matt couldn't shake a growing unease. Major Wilson had influence in the military community that could either help or hinder their efforts. And, with Veterans Day approaching, the timing of this confrontation felt ominous. Word of the encounter spread quickly through the town's tight-knit veteran community. By evening, Matt's phone was buzzing with messages from former service members offering support. Frank had apparently been busy making calls of his own. Town council's meeting tomorrow night, Frank informed Matt by phone. Word is Major Wilson's pushing for stricter enforcement of solicitation ordinances before the parade. You need to be there. Sarah overheard the conversation as she packed Ethan's lunch for the next day. What's happening? She asked once Matt hung up. As Matt explained the situation, Sarah's expression hardened. So now we're fighting the military too. The same people who should be helping us. Not the military, Matt clarified. Just one officer with his own agenda. And what is his agenda? Sarah challenged. Why would he care enough to try to stop us? Matt hesitated, unsure how much to share about Wilson's role in Jason's death. It's complicated, military politics. Sarah gave him a look that said she didn't believe that explanation for a second. I'm coming to the meeting with you. What about Ethan? Mrs. Delaney next door will watch him. This is too important for me to miss. Her voice softened slightly. We're in this together now, right? The simple statement caught Matt off guard. After weeks of carefully negotiated cooperation, Sarah's explicit acknowledgement of their partnership felt like a significant shift. Together, he agreed. The town council meeting was held in the municipal building's main chamber, a wood-paneled room with uncomfortable folding chairs arranged in neat rows. By the time Matt and Sarah arrived, the room was nearly full, an unusual turnout for what were typically sparsely attended meetings. Frank waved them toward saved seats near the front. "Word got around," he whispered as they sat. "Lot of support here tonight." Matt scanned the crowd, recognizing many faces from the park regular donors, fellow veterans, parents who had brought children to meet Ethan. Near the back sat Major Wilson, ramrod straight in a crisp button-down shirt, his expression unreadable. The meeting proceeded through routine business before reaching the agenda item titled Public Space Use Regulations. A council member with a tidy gray beard cleared his throat. "We've received concerns about certain fundraising activities taking place in Jefferson Square Park, specifically regarding appropriate use of military symbols and the involvement of minors." Murmurs rippled through the audience as Major Wilson stood to speak. "Council members, I'm Major Robert Wilson, currently serving as Joint Special Operations Liaison at Fort Liberty. I want to address a situation that I believe undermines the dignity of military service and exploits both a disabled child and a former military working dog." As Wilson detailed his objections, Matt felt Sarah tense beside him. The Major painted their fundraising efforts as manipulative and inappropriate, questioning the legitimacy of Ethan's medical needs and suggesting that Matt was using the boy to fulfill a misguided promise. "There are established channels for military families in need," Wilson concluded. "Street performances that commercialize military honors are not among them." The council chairwoman nodded. "Thank you, Major. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition to this perspective?" Frank Miller rose slowly, his arthritic knees making the movement difficult. "Name's Frank Miller, Sergeant First Class, retired, Vietnam, 2 tours." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've been watching these two every day for weeks now. There's nothing disrespectful about what they're doing." Frank's voice strengthened as he continued. "That boy lost his leg, and his father serving this country. That dog has saved more American lives than most people in this room, and Matt Sullivan gave up his military career to honor a promise to a fallen brother. If that ain't the very definition of military values, I don't know what is." Murmurs of agreement rose from the veterans in the audience. Encouraged, Frank pressed on. "Major Wilson talks about proper channels. Well, I've been fighting VA bureaucracy for 40 years. Sometimes proper channels fail our people. When that happens, we step up and take care of our own. That's what's happening here." As Frank sat down to scattered applause, others rose to speak, parents who had brought their children to learn about sacrifice from Ethan and Shadow, local business owners who had witnessed the dignity of their performances, veterans who saw in their efforts the embodiment of "leave no man behind." When it seemed all perspectives had been shared, the chairwoman asked, "Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?" To Matt's surprise, Sarah stood. She had said nothing about planning to address the council. "My name is Sarah Carter," she began, her voice steady despite the slight tremor in her hands. "Staff Sergeant Jason Carter was my husband. Ethan is our son." The room fell silent, all eyes on the composed woman whose grief remained visible just beneath her calm exterior. "For 3 years, I've been trying to navigate the systems that are supposed to help families like mine. I've filled out hundreds of forms, waited on dozens of phone calls, appealed multiple denials." She paused, looking directly at Major Wilson. The proper channels the Major mentions have failed us at every turn." Sarah gestured toward Matt. "When Matthew Sullivan showed up on our doorstep with my husband's service dog, I resented him. I resented that he was alive when Jason wasn't. I resented the reminder of everything we'd lost." Matt felt his throat tighten at her frank admission. "But every day since then, he has honored his promise to my husband. When I wanted to give up on finding a way to help Ethan walk again, Matt refused to accept defeat. The salutes they perform aren't exploiting military honors, they're embodying them." She turned to face the council directly. "My son is proud to salute like his father. That dog has been his connection to the dad he barely remembers. And the man you're trying to stop has been the only person who's managed to give my son hope that he might walk again someday." The chamber remained silent as Sarah returned to her seat. After a moment, the chairwoman cleared her throat. "This is clearly a matter that touches deeply on our community values. Before we consider any action, I think we should hear from one more person." She looked toward Major Wilson. "Major, given what we've heard tonight, do you wish to add anything?" All eyes turned to Wilson, who slowly rose from his seat. His military bearing remained intact, but something in his expression had shifted. "I stand by my concerns about the appropriate use of military symbols," he began formally. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders relaxed. "However, I cannot in good conscience ignore Mrs. Carter's testimony regarding the failure of our systems to provide adequate support." He turned slightly to face Matt and Sarah. "Staff Sergeant Carter served under my command. His loss was significant. I believe we owe his family our best efforts, through whatever channels prove effective." With those unexpected words, Major Wilson returned to his seat, leaving the council and audience momentarily stunned. After a brief discussion, the chairwoman announced, "The council sees no need for additional regulations at this time. The current permit system appears sufficient." As the meeting adjourned, Matt felt a curious mixture of relief and confusion. Wilson's partial reversal had been unexpected, leaving him wondering what had caused the shift. He would get his answer 3 days later, at the Veterans Day Parade. The Veterans Day Parade exceeded everyone's expectations. Though Matt and Ethan hadn't secured an official spot in the lineup, Frank had arranged for them to set up at a prime viewing location near the town square. As uniformed service members marched past, many broke protocol to salute Ethan and Shadow in return, some even stepping briefly out of formation to drop bills into their donation box. By the end of the parade, their collection had swelled beyond anything they'd previously achieved in a single day, nearly $5,000, pushing their total to just over $30,000. "We're getting closer," Matt told Ethan as they counted the day's donations that evening. "Just a bit more to go." Sarah, who had taken the day off to join them, seemed cautiously optimistic for the first time. "If we can maintain this momentum for another week, we might actually make it." The atmosphere in the house felt lighter than it had in months. Even Shadow seemed to sense the change, his usually vigilant demeanor relaxing enough that he allowed himself to doze beside Ethan's wheelchair. None of them were prepared for what happened the next morning. Matt was making breakfast when Ethan called out from the living room, his voice tinged with alarm. "Sergeant Matt, something's wrong." He rushed into the room to find Ethan slumped in his wheelchair, face pale and clammy. Shadow stood anxiously beside him, whining softly. "I feel really dizzy," Ethan mumbled, his words slightly slurred. "And my back hurts bad." Matt knelt before him, recognizing signs he'd been trained to watch for during his time caring for the boy. "Since when did it start?" "Woke up like this," Ethan managed, then suddenly pitched forward. Matt caught him before he could fall from the chair, immediately shouting for Sarah. She appeared from the bathroom, hair still wet from the shower, and assessed the situation with a mother's frightened expertise. "Call 911, she directed, already moving to check Ethan's pulse. "Tell them he has a history of spinal curvature and previous trauma." The ambulance arrived within minutes, paramedics efficiently transferring Ethan to a gurney while Sarah provided his medical history. Matt stood back, shadow pressed against his leg, both of them watching helplessly as the medical team worked. "I'm riding with him," Sarah said as they prepared to load Ethan into the ambulance. She looked at Matt, her expression torn between multiple concerns. "I'll follow in the car," he assured her, already reaching for his keys. "Bring Shadow. Get his medication sheet from the kitchen drawer." The next hours passed in a blur of hospital corridors, hushed consultations with doctors, and the beeping of monitoring equipment. By evening, Dr. Donovan had been called in from Walter Reed, arriving with a concerned frown that did nothing to ease their fears. "The curvature has progressed more rapidly than we anticipated," she explained in the hospital corridor, her voice low as Ethan slept in the room behind them. "It's putting pressure on his spinal cord and affecting blood flow. That's what caused today's symptoms." "What does this mean for the surgery?" Sarah asked, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Dr. Donovan's expression was grave. "It means we can't wait. The window I mentioned before, it's closing faster than expected. He needs the procedure within 2 weeks. Maximum—" The words landed like physical blows. 2 weeks. They had raised barely 40% of the needed funds. "What happens if we can't schedule it in time?" Matt asked, though he dreaded the answer. "The curvature could become permanently fixed," Dr. Donovan replied. "And the nerve damage—" She hesitated, clearly reluctant to spell out the worst possibilities. "It could eventually affect function in his remaining limbs." Sarah made a small, wounded sound. "He could lose mobility in his arm, too." The doctor nodded soberly. "It's a possibility we need to consider." "We'll get the money," Matt said firmly, though uncertainty churned in his stomach. "Whatever it takes." Dr. Donovan placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've reached out to some medical foundations that might help, but they typically take months to process applications, and we don't have months." After the doctor left, Matt and Sarah sat in silence in the hard plastic chairs outside Ethan's room. Shadow had been allowed to stay with the boy after a sympathetic nurse recognized the dog's training vest and service background. "We failed him," Sarah whispered finally. "All our efforts. And we're still not even close." Matt wanted to offer reassurance, but hollow promises seemed worse than silence. "We'll find a way," he said instead, though the words rang empty even to his own ears. Sarah turned to him, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. "This was Jason's worst fear. You know, not dying, he accepted that risk, but leaving us unable to care for Ethan properly." The mention of Jason hung between them, a ghost whose presence had shaped their every interaction since Matt's arrival. "I need some air," Sarah said suddenly, standing, Will you stay with him?" Matt nodded, watching as she walked down the corridor, shoulders bent under the weight of a burden that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Inside the room, Ethan slept fitfully, his small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed. Shadow lay with his head on the mattress, amber eyes tracking every movement, every change in the boy's breathing. "We promised we'd take care of him," Matt said softly to the dog. "Both of us did." Shadow's ears twitched in response, his gaze never leaving Ethan's. Never. As night settled over the hospital, Matt dozed intermittently in the bedside chair. Sometime after midnight, he woke to find Sarah had returned, sitting quietly on the other side of the bed. "I called my parents," she said when she noticed Matt was awake. "They're going to mortgage their retirement cabin. It won't be enough, but it's something." The admission clearly pained her. Sarah had been fiercely independent since Jason's death, reluctant to accept help even from family. "We shouldn't have to do this," she continued, anger seeping into her tired voice. "Jason gave everything for this country. The least they could do is help his son walk again." Matt had no answer for her justified bitterness. The system's failure was complete and inexcusable, yet entirely typical of what many military families faced. Mourning brought no improvement in Ethan's condition. Though conscious, he remained weak and uncomfortable, the pain in his back requiring regular medication. Dr. Donovan returned with a specialist, who conducted additional tests, their hushed consultation in the hallway doing nothing to ease Matt and Sarah's anxiety. "We're expediting everything on our end," Dr. Donovan assured them. "If you can secure the funding within the next 10 days, we can schedule the surgery immediately." 10 days to raise more than $40,000. The impossibility of the task settled like lead in Matt's chest. When Frank arrived to visit that afternoon, bringing a handmade card signed by veterans from the park, Matt stepped outside to update him on the situation. "Jesus," the old veteran muttered, shaking his head. "Kid can't catch a break." "We're out of options, Frank," Matt admitted, running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Short of robbing a bank, I don't see how we make this happen in time." Frank studied him thoughtfully. "Might be one last card to play, though you ain't gonna like it. At this point, I'd consider anything." "Major Wilson," Frank said simply. "Man's carrying a load of guilt about what happened to Jason and the boy. Maybe it's time he had a chance to make amends." Matt's initial reaction was resistance. The idea of approaching Wilson, of essentially leveraging the man's guilt, felt wrong on multiple levels. "He made his position clear at the council meeting," Matt argued. "He doesn't approve of what we're doing." "He also backed down at the end," Frank pointed out. "Something changed his mind, even a little. Worth exploring why." Before Matt could respond, Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "Ethan's asking for you," she said. "His pain's worse." Matt hurried back inside to find Ethan curled on his side, tears streaming down his face despite the medication. Shadow was whining anxiously, pressing himself against the bed as if trying to absorb the boy's pain. "Hey, buddy," Matt said, keeping his voice steady as he knelt beside the bed. "Rough day." "Huh?" Ethan nodded, his small face contorted. "Is this because I did too many salutes? The doctor said my back got worse." The innocent question broke something in Matt's chest. "No, Absolutely not, he assured the boy. This would have happened anyway. You did nothing wrong. Will I still get my new leg? Matt exchanged a glance with Sarah, who stood silent in the doorway. We're working on it, he said finally. Everyone's working really hard to make it happen. That night, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep under increased pain medication, Matt made a decision. Slipping out of the room, he walked to the hospital's small chapel, seeking privacy for what would be the most difficult call of his life. He found Major Wilson's number through military channels and, taking a deep breath, pressed dial. When the call went straight to voicemail, Matt hesitated, then spoke clearly into the phone. Major Wilson, this is Matthew Sullivan. I'm calling about Ethan Carter. His condition has deteriorated significantly. If you meant what you said about owing his family our best efforts, we need your help. We're at Memorial Hospital, pediatric wing. After ending the call, Matt sat in the quiet chapel, the weight of his failure settling around him like a shroud. He had promised Jason he would care for his family, and that promise now seemed impossible to fulfill. For the first time since Afghanistan, Matt Sullivan wept for Jason, for Ethan, for promises that might remain forever broken. When Matt returned to Ethan's hospital room the following morning, after grabbing coffee from the cafeteria, he found an unexpected commotion. Sarah stood near the bed, speaking with Dr. Donovan and a hospital administrator, while a nurse reviewed documents on a tablet. "What's happening?" Matt asked, setting down his coffee cup. Sarah turned, her expression a mixture of confusion and cautious hope. "Someone made a donation," she said, her voice unsteady. "A big one." Dr. Donovan nodded, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "The hospital received a wire transfer this morning. The full remaining amount needed for Ethan's surgery." Matt felt the room tilt slightly. "The full amount, but that's $42,000, the administrator confirmed, adjusting his glasses. The donor requested anonymity, but indicated the funds were specifically for Ethan Carter's procedure. "Anonymous," Matt repeated, his mind racing through possibilities. Sarah's parents couldn't possibly have raised that much so quickly. Frank and the other veterans had already contributed what they could. "Completely anonymous," the administrator affirmed. "We've verified the funds, and Dr. Donovan has already begun scheduling the surgical team." Sarah sank into the chair beside Ethan's bed, where the boy slept peacefully, unaware of the miracle that had just occurred. Shadow, ever vigilant, moved to place his head on her knee, sensing her emotional turmoil. "I don't understand," she whispered. Who would donate that much money? Matt had a suspicion, but kept it to himself. Instead, he asked, "When can the surgery happen?" "We've scheduled it for Monday." Dr. Donovan replied, 4 days from now. We'll start preoperative preparations tomorrow." After the medical team departed, Sarah looked up at Matt, tears brimming in her eyes. "Did you do this? Did you find a way?" He shook his head. "I wish I could take credit. I made some calls yesterday, but, He trailed off, remembering his desperate message to Major Wilson. Could it possibly have been him? A knock at the door interrupted their speculation. Frank Miller stood in the doorway, a newspaper tucked under his arm and a knowing smile on his weathered face. "Hear you folks got some good news," he said. Shuffling into the room, Matt studied the old veteran suspiciously. "Did you know about this, Frank?" "Know about what?" Frank asked innocently, though his eyes twinkled. "Just came to check on the boy." Before Matt could press further, Ethan stirred, blinking awake. "What's going on?" he asked groggily. Sarah leaned forward, gently brushing hair from his forehead. "We've got wonderful news, sweetheart. The doctors can do your surgery. You're going to get your new leg." Ethan's face lit up with childish hope, momentarily erasing the pain that had marked his features in recent days. "For real when?" "Monday," Matt confirmed, moving to the boy's side. "Just a few more days." "Did we raise enough money with our salutes?" Ethan asked, looking between the adults. Matt and Sarah exchanged glances. "We had some help," Matt explained carefully. "Someone made a very generous donation." "Who?" Ethan persisted. "We don't know, honey," Sarah said. "They wanted to stay anonymous." Frank cleared his throat. "Some battles get fought in the open, with everyone watching," he said, addressing Ethan directly. "Others happen behind the scenes, with heroes nobody ever gets to thank. Both kinds matter." The old veteran's words seemed deliberate, carrying a message Matt couldn't quite decipher. Before he could question Frank further, a nurse arrived to check Ethan's vitals, and the conversation shifted to preparations for the upcoming surgery. Later that afternoon, while Sarah took a much-needed break to shower and change clothes at home, Matt stepped into the hospital corridor to call Dr. Donovan with a question about post-operative care. As he ended the call, he noticed a familiar figure disappearing around a corner, the straight-backed silhouette of Major Wilson. Matt hurried after him, catching up in the parking garage. "Major!" he called out. Wilson stopped but didn't immediately turn around. When he finally did, his expression was carefully neutral. "Sullivan, was it you?" Matt asked directly. "The donation—" The Major's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The hospital assured donor anonymity. "They maintained it," Matt assured him. "But I need to know, for Jason's sake." At the mention of Jason's name, something shifted in Wilson's eyes. "Let's just say a wrong is being partially righted." "Thank you isn't enough," Matt said, emotion threatening to overwhelm his voice. Wilson shook his head sharply. "I don't want your thanks. I don't deserve them." He paused, seeming to wrestle with himself before continuing. "I should never have authorized that demonstration with civilians present. Should never have let Carter bring his family to that location." The admission hung in the air between them, the first time Wilson had acknowledged his role in the tragedy that claimed Jason's life and Ethan's leg. "The intelligence was wrong," Matt said quietly. "That wasn't on you." "The risk assessment was mine," Wilson countered. "The responsibility was mine." He straightened, military bearing reasserting itself. "This changes nothing about my position on using military honors for fundraising, but the boy deserves his chance." Before Matt could respond, Wilson turned and walked away, the conversation clearly over. When Matt returned to Ethan's room, he found Sarah had come back from home, looking refreshed despite the exhaustion that still shadowed her eyes. She was sorting through a stack of mail she had collected from their house. "Look at this," she said, holding up an envelope with a puzzled expression. "It was mixed in with the junk mail. I almost threw it away." Matt took the envelope, noting it had no return address, just their names written in block letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of a handwritten letter. The original had been written by Jason. "Another letter?" Matt asked, remembering the one Sarah had shown him from Jason's journal. Sarah nodded. "But I've never seen this one before. It's addressed to both of us." They read it together, shoulders touching as they bent over the page, Sarah and Matt. "If you're reading this together, then Matt has kept his promise. And Sarah, you found a way to let him. I'm grateful to you both." "There's something I never told either of you. Shadow wasn't originally assigned to me by chance. I requested him specifically after a handler was killed in action. I promised that handler I would make sure Shadow found a home with purpose if anything happened to me. Promises like these form a chain, linking us together even after some of us are gone. Matt, I knew when I asked you to look after my family that you would honor that request with the same dedication you've shown to every mission. Sarah, I knew you would resist at first. Your independence is one of the things I've always loved most about you. I don't know what challenges you're facing now, but I know this together. You're stronger than either of you alone. Trust each other. Let Ethan see that strength. Shadow knows all our secrets. He was there with me through my darkest days after my first tour, when the nightmares were worst. He's the reason I could come home to you whole, Sarah. And Matt, he's the reason I trusted you with my family. A man who earns that dog's loyalty is someone worth believing in. Until we meet again. Jason." Sarah's hand trembled as she lowered the letter. "How did this get to us now? Who had it?" Matt shook his head, equally confused. "The only person who could have had a letter like this would be Major Wilson?" Sarah finished, understanding dawning. "Jason must have given it to him, in case something happened. But why deliver it now? After 3 years?" Sarah looked toward Ethan, who was showing Frank how Shadow could rest his head precisely on the hospital bed rail on command. "Because now we're finally doing what Jason wanted, working together." The revelation of Shadow's deeper history, that he had been passed from handler to handler, each making and keeping promises to the others, added another layer to the bond they all shared. The dog wasn't simply a pet or even just a service animal. He was the living embodiment of a chain of honor that stretched back through Jason to others before him, as if sensing their thoughts. Shadow looked up from his position beside Ethan's bed, his intelligent eyes moving between Matt and Sarah with quiet understanding. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," Sarah said quietly, turning to face Matt directly. "Something I found when I was going through Jason's things yesterday." She hesitated, then continued. "There was a letter from the VA Medical Board, dated a few weeks before that last deployment. Jason was diagnosed with PTSD, more severe than he let on to anyone." Matt felt a chill run through him. "He never said anything?" "He wouldn't have," Sarah replied. "But the letter indicated he was scheduled for medical evaluation that might have led to a discharge. The deployment happened before the evaluation could take place." "That's why he was so insistent about me taking Shadow if anything happened." Matt realized. He knew he might not be coming back, one way or another. The weight of this knowledge that Jason had foreseen his own end, had planned meticulously for his family's care, was both heartbreaking and strangely comforting. Even from beyond the grave, Jason Carter was taking care of those he loved. "He chose you," Sarah said simply. "Before anything happened, he chose you to be here, with us." The admission transformed something between them, a final barrier dissolving. Sarah had carried resentment that Matt had survived when Jason hadn't, never knowing that Jason himself had orchestrated Matt's presence in their lives. As evening fell over the hospital, bringing with it the quieter rhythms of night shifts and dimmed lights, the room felt different, not just because of the hope the surgery now offered, but because the truth had finally been fully revealed. Jason had planned for everything, including bringing together the people he loved most in the world. The morning of Ethan's surgery dawned clear and bright, autumn sunlight streaming through the hospital windows with golden promise. The pediatric surgical waiting room had filled steadily since dawn, not just with Matt, Sarah, and Frank, but with a steady stream of veterans from the park, neighbors, and even some of Ethan's schoolmates and their parents. "Quite a turnout," Frank observed, surveying the crowded room with satisfaction. "Word travels fast in this town." Sarah nodded, her face pale but composed. She had barely slept, spending most of the night by Ethan's bedside until the pre-surgical team had gently ushered her out at dawn. "I never expected so many people to care." "That's what community looks like," Frank said, his weathered hand patting hers. "Took you folks a while to let them in, but once you did." Matt stood by the window, watching as Shadow lay patiently near the waiting room door. The hospital had made an exception for the service dog, recognizing his special bond with Ethan. Even now, the German Shepherd's attention remained fixed on the corridor leading to the surgical suite, as if maintaining invisible contact with the boy. "He knows," Matt said quietly when Sarah joined him. "Dogs always know more than we think." Sarah leaned slightly against his shoulder, the casual contact no longer awkward between them. "Ethan asked Shadow to guard us while he's asleep. Said we needed looking after too." The observation, so typical of Ethan's thoughtfulness, brought a smile to Matt's face despite his anxiety. "Smart kid. Like his father," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. As the surgery entered its third hour, Frank organized an impromptu prayer circle among the waiting veterans. Matt watched from a respectful distance, surprised when Sarah joined them, her hand clasped between those of a Vietnam veteran and a young female soldier who had contributed weekly to their park fund. The scene embodied everything Jason had valued: service, community, faith in something larger than oneself. Matt found himself wishing his friend could see it, though in some ways it felt as if Jason's presence had never truly left them. Midway through the fourth hour, Shadow suddenly stood, his posture alert but not alarmed. Seconds later, Dr. Donovan appeared in the doorway, still wearing her surgical cap. The room fell silent as Sarah and Matt stepped forward together. "The surgery was successful," Dr. Donovan announced, her professional demeanor briefly giving way to a genuine smile. "We were able to correct the spinal curvature and secure the prosthetic attachment points exactly as planned." A collective exhalation of relief swept through the room, followed by muted applause and a few tearful embraces among the waiting group. "There's significant recovery ahead," the doctor continued, addressing Matt and Sarah directly. "Physical therapy will be intensive, and there will be challenges, but Ethan's youth and determination are strong advantages." "When can we see him?" Sarah asked, her composure finally cracking as tears spilled down her cheeks. "He's in recovery now. You can see him briefly in about 30 minutes, though he'll be groggy from anesthesia." Dr. Donovan glanced at Shadow, who remained attentive at Matt's side. "And yes, his four-legged friend can have a short visit too." As the doctor departed to continue her post-operative work, the waiting room erupted in quiet celebration. Frank began organizing a meal delivery schedule for the coming weeks, while others discussed transportation arrangements for Ethan's future physical therapy appointments. Matt found himself momentarily overwhelmed, stepping into a quiet corridor to collect his thoughts. This outcome, Ethan's successful surgery, the community's embrace, his own acceptance into Sarah's life had seemed impossible just weeks ago. A movement at the end of the hallway caught his attention. Major Wilson stood near the elevator, watching the activity in the waiting room from a distance. When he noticed Matt observing him, he gave a single, formal nod acknowledgement without need for further words, then disappeared into the elevator. Some debts, Matt realized, could never be fully repaid, but they could be honored through continued service and care for those left behind. 3 months later, on a mild winter afternoon, Matt stood in the backyard of the Carter home, setting up the small obstacle course that had become part of Ethan's daily physical therapy routine. Shadow moved methodically alongside him, carrying smaller equipment pieces in his mouth with careful precision. "How's it looking?" Sarah called from the kitchen window. "Almost ready," Matt replied. "Is our star patient prepared for his daily torture session?" Sarah laughed, a sound that had become wonderfully common in recent weeks. "He's putting on his jacket. Says he's going to beat yesterday's time by 10 seconds. "Bold claim," Matt responded with a grin. "We'll see." The back door opened, and Ethan appeared, walking carefully but steadily on his new prosthetic leg. The advanced device, with its articulated joints and custom-fitted socket, had transformed the boy's mobility. Though he still used a wheelchair for longer distances and tired days, his progress with walking had exceeded even Dr. Donovan's optimistic projections. "I've been practicing my turns," Ethan announced confidently as he navigated the steps. "Shadow's been helping me balance." As if demonstrating, the German Shepherd moved to Ethan's left side, providing a solid presence the boy could steady himself against if needed. "Ready when you are, Sergeant," Matt said, using the playful title that had become their private joke. Sarah joined them in the yard, carrying a stopwatch and Ethan's water bottle. The three of them, four, including Shadow, had developed a comfortable rhythm in their shared life, each finding their role in supporting Ethan's recovery while building something new together. The Carter house had transformed as well. The spare room remained Matt's, but no longer felt temporary. Sarah had hung pictures in the hallway that included Matt and Shadow alongside family photos. The wooden donation box from the park sat on the mantel, repurposed as a container for mementos of their journey. Most significantly, they had established the Carter Sullivan Foundation, using surplus donations that had continued to arrive even after Ethan's surgery was funded. The foundation supported medical expenses for children of fallen service members, with Frank Miller serving as its honorary chairman. "Before we start," Ethan said, suddenly serious, "can we go visit Dad this weekend? I want to show him how well I can walk now." Sarah exchanged a glance with Matt. "Of course we can," she said softly. Shadow, too, Ethan insisted. Dad would want to see all of us together. That Saturday, they stood as a family before Jason's grave at the Fort Liberty Military Cemetery. Ethan walked the final stretch unassisted, his gait growing steadier with each determined step. When they reached the headstone, Ethan straightened his shoulders and raised his hand in a perfect salute, beside him, without command. Shadow rose on his hind legs and did the same. Matt and Sarah watched in silence, neither feeling the need to join the gesture. This was between father and son, a private communication across the boundary that separated them. As they turned to leave, Sarah's hand found Matt's, their fingers intertwining naturally. Behind them, Ethan walked between them, one hand resting lightly on Shadow's back for balance. You know, Frank had said to Matt just the day before, that dog and boy saluting together, it breaks my heart every time, but in the best possible way. Matt understood exactly what the old veteran meant. Some heartbreaks remade you into something stronger, something more connected to others. Jason's final mission, bringing them all together, had succeeded beyond anything he could have imagined. As they reached the car, Ethan looked up at the clear blue sky. Think Dad can see me walking? I know he can, buddy, Matt replied, his voice steady despite the emotion behind the words. He never took his eyes off you, not for a single day. Shadow barked once in apparent agreement, his tail wagging as he watched over his family continuing the mission that had been passed from handler to handler, from father to friend, from soldier to civilian. One last salute to honor a promise kept. When Shadow stands on his hind legs beside young Ethan, both offering that perfect military salute, they're doing more than performing a trick, they're honoring the sacred bonds that hold our nation together. Remember when promises meant something, when a man's word was his bond. That German shepherd and that brave boy remind us of the America we fought to protect, where sacrifice is honored and no one gets left behind. Like many of you, I've seen how our system can fail those who gave everything. We shake our heads when bureaucracy denies help to families of fallen heroes. But then we witness ordinary Americans stepping up, a retired bus driver contributing his Social Security check, a widow sharing her limited resources, veterans rallying around one of their own. That's the country we remember, the one worth fighting for. Shadow and Ethan's story isn't just about a dog and a boy saluting with two legs. It's about all of us standing tall when it matters most. When was the last time something broke your heart and healed it simultaneously? That's what genuine American spirit does. It reminds us that through our deepest wounds, we find our greatest strength together.